What's happening?
Hey man, how are you?
I'm good, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Always good.
Man, from just a strategy, business, big picture, global thinking conversations, I don't know if I've had more of those conversations with anybody in my life than I do with you. So it's always a treat when we get to connect and
Yeah,
just be able to draw off of. And we were talking about how hot it's been and
yeah,
like, oh, this is like records, and we have short-term memory that no, it's been hot like this. It was probably hot like this last summer. And it's just like we
yeah.
tend to forget so much. So Fred, let's jump in, man. I mean, we let's talk life before real estate,
Sure.
because I think, to me, so fascinating. And I think too, where we see with a lot of agents that sometimes default into the industry, and getting in ways like how you get in, but I defaulted in as well. So it's
Yep.
just kind of interesting to see. But I'm always fascinated to talk with people that had life before, right?
Yeah.
Whatever previous career there was prior to real estate, because that seems to be most of people's path, most of their journey, is they're doing something else, and then they fall into this. So
Yeah.
I love your backstory, your history, and I think that'll give some context as we start to shift and talk real estate, kind
Sure.
of what that looked like prior to.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So thank you. Yeah, it's great to be on here as you mentioned. I would say, my world was corporate world. And I'll just fast forward through this a little bit, but I started with L Bean. I built my business education with them, their temperament, their approach to business, their analytical nature, their professionalism. And I'll come
Mm.
back to that full circle later. I'll say it again, their professionalism, right? Key in like teaching me how to behave and how to present myself in all versions of my future self.
Right.
And so they left LL Bean after 10 years in product development and other parts of the company, inventory management, sourcing, and went to a textile company that made fabrics. They are the inventors of fleece, the Polytech fleece, that, or any fleece that you see. They were the first company to ever invent that, and they were the big players. That they supplied North Face and Patagonia, and L Bean is the largest big box retailer. And I went to work for them for 8 years. And at that company, I got to see all other companies. So I
Mm.
got L Bean, but then I got to go have an office in Land's End, and I got to go to Eddie Bauer and Cabela's and Bass Pro, and you name it, all big. I was running all of the big box retail relationships for them. And so then I just got this, plethora of information and ways to run a company, maybe ways not to run a company or a division. And so the education in that part of my life was really important. And then around 2000, let me think about this. Right around 2000, um, they were going Chapter 11, the Polytech company, because
Yeah.
our fleece was going to Asia, and so it was that was an experience of itself. We won't go down that road, but right about that time, I left Polytech, and I started. I jumped in with a startup that was forming in right around 2000, 2002, and that startup was bootstrapped. We didn't have any real investors, maybe a couple small guys. We had, candidly, too many partners, and we just got after it. And immediately, I packed my bags and went to Shanghai, China, to live there, to build all of the supplier relationships, to secure all the right supplier relationships in China. And so I lived there pretty consistently for a year, um, and Elaine and and then I was flying back and forth, monthly, basically, to build customer base here, for the actual sales and everything. And so that evolution went from originally being textiles, fabrics only, to really quickly realizing there wasn't enough money in textile only in Asia, because the fabrics were so inexpensive, the margin wasn't meaningful. And so we got really quickly, we evolved, pivoted into this full package, one source hub where you could engineer a fabric and have the fabric made and have the garment designed or design it yourself. And we would make all of that for private label customers like LL Bean or REI or any of these outdoor companies. And then we would package it up, put their label in it, ship it to wherever they wanted in the world.
Wow.
And, yeah. So
I mean, there's definitely we could spend hours just unpacking a lot of that. I know there was some tough decisions, and especially going the startup route versus the opportunity that you did have at that time, which for most, you had an opportunity with Reebok at the time.
I told you I still have it right here. It's right in the drawer.
So there's a couple things that I want to kind of navigate through this a little bit. One being able to see all of the different types of companies and kind of being exposed for the most part within same industry realm, but being able to see different companies and the way they operate and the decisions they make. Was there a common thread amongst them that kind of really stood out that allowed them to get to the level that they were at?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. I think the common thread for those that succeeded was a significant amount of empowerment and autonomy. And so company to company, they had different governance for product development and merchandising. And I found it was pretty much across the board, the more restrictive or top-down influenced decision-making, happened, the least likely they were able to take advantage of real big opportunities. So a great example, Land's End had a gentleman there named Jeff Warner. And Jeff was about the time I partnered with Land's End through Polartec. Land's End was just a little tiny company and certainly a little tiny user of fleece. In 4 years, we took them from that to the single largest user of that fabric in the world. And this gentleman, Jeff Warner, he just was honestly in the day, he was a merchandising genius. He just every opportunity he could just stack and stack and stack, and no one was standing in his way. Their CEO at the time was Bill Ferry. He was a great man, great leader. He knew that Jeff had the skill, and he just, he probably supported him, but he didn't stand in the way of him. And so there were other companies that I won't name specifically that didn't do that. There was a lot of governance and a lot of, okay, you come before us with all your plans, and then we're going to decide why? Because we're not really close to the customer like you are, but still we're going to be the ones that decide what goes forward and what doesn't. And they would grow slower. And maybe that doesn't mean they still didn't grow. It just means they grew slower. They took less advantage of the bigger opportunities. So.
Is that the more you see, the more that you're removed from the actual boots on ground, the actual customer, that you lose sight of that?
You do. You can't not. And as my company grew, even I lost a little bit of touch with that, because it's the day-to-day talking to people, asking questions, listening to what those candid answers are. If it's really difficult as a leader of something that has scaled to make sure you stay super close to the customer. You can do it, but it has to be so intentional. You have to develop tools and ways, methodologies to make sure you stay close to the customer.
Yeah. So with that, because it just makes me think about like your journey through real estate, and really getting into super connected to the customer, and sometimes maybe a little too much, right? We've all been guilty of that, and then it becomes a little more emotional and a little bit of emotional connection, which is maybe good, bad, and different. I mean, it's just what happens. But how do you go from running an international company like that to be able to, oh wow, now I'm a husband and wife team in real estate, and I don't have all of these resources. It's just us here. Like,
Yeah.
how does that shift from being able to play on a global scale? I mean, is that just a decision? Is that where does the growth for me? Like I'm trying to be like, man, how do I have to like humble myself and going into a new endeavor? Like how was that navigating that transition?
That was pretty tough. I mean, when you're, you get a little later in life, pivots within your industry are difficult, but a complete pivot to be like in the top 10% of your knowledge base within an industry to the arguably bottom 10% of the knowledge base, maybe the bottom 15 in another industry is not for the faint of heart, for sure, but I had lost that feeling at my previous company, that close connected feeling that with the customer, because of the scale of it and everything, and I was starving for that in my own world, in the place I lived.
Yeah.
So it was important for me initially for two reasons. One, because I needed to feed that part of myself, right? Our business ventures, I think they're, we have all read books about business, but there's a whole spirit side of Fred Butts that has to be fed as well, and what does that feel like for me on this planet and how I interact with people in the place that I live. I didn't know anybody where I lived. Nobody. I was out of the country 180 days a year. And when I came back and I rolled into real estate, it was not equally, but it was about that connection, about now I can bump into somebody right here at my grocery store and be like, hey, how are you? And there's value in that. There's real value to me. There's value in that. Yeah. So the decision to be close to them was twofold, I said, right? One is to just feed back into myself and make connections in my community, for both Elaine and I, because we were both traveling the world like crazy. And then the second part is just, I didn't know how else to become an expert in my field without being attached to the people that I was serving, and making some bad decisions and overcommitting myself and overextending myself, and then learning how to draw back and say, okay, that's not scalable, but there's a way to offer that service without you doing it. And how do you do that? But also just continuing to stay close to the client. And I know, like, the future version, whether we go, as we move maybe more heavily into luxury or other places, maybe there'll be a continued, I would call it like a tempering or a management of that, of how much of myself I can give to that situation. But those are the two reasons why it's been very personal. And we've done a lot of referral business, because everybody that has that kind of touch, that feeling, the way we make them feel, usually yields additional business for us. So that part's been good, but I do think it's not, there's, and you've all been through it, those of you that have been in real estate for a long time. It's that continual management of you want your customers to still feel like they're being personally taken care of, and so it's always going to be a balance on how to do that.
How do you, just thinking back, right? It's almost that because you go so many chapters in one endeavor, and then you got to go back to the beginning of the book in this new endeavor. But being able to do something that you learn the principles to where now you can go back. Yes, I'm going back to the very beginning of this book. Yeah. But now I know how to change the speed.
Yeah.
And I can put it on 1.5, 2, 2.5, but it takes principles that are grounded that carry over. So for you, the non-negotiable principles that you had, the foundation that you saw, that you built on, how did that carry right into real estate?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the fundamentals of the core values, if you will, of which are very much a part of who we are, right, are just a tremendous amount of respect and professional handling of all situations, professionalism, compassion. It really, even, and I mean, and it's not everybody. I'm just the way I operate. When I talk to somebody, even in my personal life, I'm a curious person. I really want to know. I mean, you and I have had enough conversations where, I'm going to ask you, hey,
Yeah.
like, what's going on with your races? And I want to know, like, and I'm gonna peel that onion back, because, like, I'm thinking about that when I'm not with you, and so that's how we are with our clients. Elaine and I both, like, clients and our friends, we love to know and help, and sometimes we can give some advice, and sometimes we can't. But so that principle of just caring and being curious about the well-being of the people you're working with, that was instilled in me right from the LL Bean. Well, I was instilled in me from my mom and dad, but certainly even at LL Bean, and it carried through everything I've ever done. And
Does that,
yeah,
staying curious, does that allow the pivots to be possible, and in the adjustments? Like, if you're rigid and you're not a curious person, pivots almost would seem impossible.
Yeah, they would. And I will say, like, you're always in a company you scale, or even, the companies I work for, you're always pivoting in some space. But certainly at our company, as we grew our company, we pivoted a lot. And but I will say it's different. Like, when we pivot, we pivot from a place of, sometimes a place of comfort. Like, I'm inside my industry, and I'm going to pivot from textiles to full package garments, the whole thing, right? That was uncomfortable, but I was in my industry. The same factories that were making the fabrics are going to make the garments. It wasn't like, now pivoting from a place of discomfort and lack of knowledge, like I had to say, now, to be clear, I always had one foot in real estate throughout my since 1995. I was always trying to buy a property that I could improve and then sell it for a profit all along the way. And that included later in life having some rental properties and doing some improvements, and, building a couple custom homes. And so I've always been around that and love that. Right. But I think when it's really uncomfortable, when you're unsure of yourself, when you're, it's those moments that trying to pivot is a little harder. And it's probably even more important in those moments to do that, but it sometimes can be a little intimidating. So
do you find that, like, knowing that you've built up a certain skill set, that, oh, I've done it before, I can easily do it again, right? That reminder of that, hey, it was hard. I was able to do it. So I know I'm capable. It's just what has to be burning to push through that next jump, or learning something new. Like, something's got to keep us moving. For you, what is that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So when I look at any venture that I do, anytime you're in build mode, you're in, like, acquiring knowledge, you're building, it's unsteady ground. You don't know what you don't know. You're trying to make, and now you're dealing with other people's livelihood, not just my own, and not another business's performance, but an actual individual or a couple that, that's really counting on the performance of that. And so I think there's some other, this circles back to the principles you mentioned. Problem solving is like going to the gym. Like, you don't solve monstrous problems day one. You learn over a period of time how to solve seemingly, some simple problems, and they get bigger and bigger if you're scaling a company. And so at some point they become, maybe not to you, but if from the outside world looking in, they're monstrous problems. When you have, many millions of dollars on the line for bigger companies, that's a really intimidating feeling. And you learn how to solve problems through that, and the tools you use, the communication, the continued respect, the way the negotiation skills, all of that stuff plays into it. And then you come to this new place, real estate, and you start to encounter more problems. And the first part of it is, and I know I mentioned this to you, there's an incredible book by Bob Iger, The Ride of a Lifetime. and it really resonated with me because he deals with such like the stress and pressure of a couple of things that happen in that book, and we can, if there's time, we'll talk about it later, is at such a scale that I can't even, I think of the things I went through and I look at that and I'm like, wow, that is so next level. And so taking that to real estate and saying, okay, in real estate, right, what is the thing that's like probably the biggest challenge with real estate for me is that everyone always thinks their hair's on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not.
Right.
It's just, and you just got to be able to, you got to be the one in the room that says, I got it, but this is going to be okay. Like we can get through this and we'll be okay. And this is how we're going to solve it. And these are the tools we'll use. And I think that calm and that sense of most, not everything, but most everything's solvable. We treat everything and everybody with respect, mutual respect and professionalism, and we'll come to some conclusions and hopefully an outcome that works for everybody. But yeah, I think those skills, those methodologies help you when you pivot into something like this. You have to draw on them. You have to be able to. I would have to be able to.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it's Goggins, cookie jar concept, right? Sometimes you gotta reach back into that cookie jar and we go through and we do things. And I think where we can, have more of an awareness around the tough times and the tough things that we're encountering and that we're doing, because we can draw back on them. And sometimes in the moment it feels like it's new, but it's like, wait, hold on. Maybe it's not exactly, maybe it's a close cousin, but there is some similarities here, and we've gotten through hard times. We can get through hard times again. And so I think that's really good. Yeah. I'm curious to get some more of your nuggets and takeaways from that book. I love the title, Ride of a Lifetime, because I mean, we're all on a ride of a lifetime.
It is. And it's, I'll just tell you, like, the way the book opens, and I don't want to monopolize the time, but the way the book opens, it's Bob Iger, now the CEO of Disney, and this is Disney that bought Pixar from Steve Jobs. I mean, all these incredible, the best time for Disney, and it's the history of its company, opening the single largest theme park in China in the world, 10 times the size of Disney in Florida. Right?
Jeez.
Everyone in the world's at this event. And he's got to give speeches, and he's got dignitaries and, premiers and everybody. So he's there the day before or 2 days before the event. He gets a phone call that says, and you may remember this, this is in Orlando. They call him and say, Bob, there's been a shooting at an Orlando nightclub, a mass shooting. The guy went into a nightclub and killed, and there's footage of this gentleman in front of the Disney gate with the gun in a carriage, but there was a music event, so he couldn't get in. So that's all available. He's at this event on the other side of the world, and it's at his doorstep, and so. Okay, so and there's a whole how he dealt with that, and really, and when you're someone as big as Disney, anything in the world that happens, I think it's something like 53,000 people they employ. Anything in the world that happens involves Disney staff. Anything big, like a plane goes down with a full plane, someone's family member or cousin or something is on that plane. Like, so they have a whole department that handles these issues. So they did that. Second, so he's moving through that and managing that. And then the morning of, or the evening of, like 2 a.m, before the grand opening, he gets a phone call, and it's a same security guy back home. And he says, there's been a problem. There's been an event. A young boy was killed by an alligator on our park.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yep. Right. And so, like, I just think of, like, because I had those little mini moments, nothing like that, right? But I had moments where I'm like, oh wow, this is not good. The situation I'm in right now is, in the previous world, not good. Or even in real estate, this is really troublesome.
Yeah.
But Iger just stayed true to his values. He he ended up talking to the parents that, and probably against the wishes of the attorneys, and just said, whatever you need, this will never, I'll make sure this never happens again. And whatever you need, we're here for you. I don't care what it is. And so it's just that, right? It's just that, like, somebody at that level, in most cases, that CEO would never have a conversation with that person, but he chose to do that. And you talked about the connection earlier, right? Like, remember, like, it's all my fault. No matter what happens at this company, it's all my fault. And I don't ever, if I run the company, I never could reserve the right to detach myself from that responsibility, even at the customer level. So I just thought that was fascinating.
No, it is, because it's staying true to who you are and just being a good human. And there's so much that gets in the way. And it's like, no, dude, that's common sense.
Yeah.
It's common sense to be a good human. It's a common sense to reach out and be there for them and support them. But so many people just don't do it for whatever reason. But I think it's not even knowing what their values are, what they stand for.
Yeah.
And those are just decision-making filters. And when you do things just genuinely, authentically like that, just because you're a dang good human being,
right.
That's the values you stand on, right? That's the hill you'll die on. I'm curious, you've brought up professionalism several times and talking about learning that at LL Bean. What was that like? I mean, was that instilled? I mean, where did professionalism be such a guiding light for them?
Yeah. So, it's, hang on just a second. It started like, so professionalism starts with respect, right? Like professionalism and respect. And I certainly learned a lot of that from my mom and dad, like, for sure. There's no question that was, a pinnacle part of how I was raised. And so when I went to LL Bean, for example, like, maybe it's a little different now, but when I was there, if you were doing something wrong or you had a significant disagreement, there was a level of respect in that disagreement, in that discourse between each other, and you could have those, some people a little more than others, but in general terms, it was a level of professionalism. And when I went to other companies, even when I went to Polatech, that was a little bit rougher. Like, they didn't have, some of the folks there came from a different industry, and it could be a little more aggressive. And I just took stock of that and said, I don't think it ever has to be that way. Like, and when I ran my company, there were conversations that were very, like, they were very expensive conversations, and for a variety of people, and the mistakes that had been made, or were going to be seriously detrimental. But yet I always appreciated when my customers would handle me professionally and give me that respect. And even if it's a hard conversation and it might have resulted in some decisions that were, tough, we just stayed in that space and respected each other as human beings. And I feel like that professionalism, as I came into the real estate industry, wasn't as prevalent as I was expecting. It was not as, there was a lot of, and I understand why. Everyone didn't have that benefit. They don't get the benefit of working in those environments and learning from people and watching how that can be handled. So, but for me, it is a core value, like that respect, that like, yes, there are moments that get a little heated, but I think professionalism is kind of the people first aspect of it, right? It's the human, just like you said, it's the human being aspect of what we do. And I just think it's critical for us. It's critical. And I know our clients appreciate that, and so.
Yeah, no, it is. And I love that, right? Professionalism starts with respect. And I think it's, respecting, yourself first, respecting, the company, respecting the team, respecting each other. And I was I read something, might have been yesterday or this morning, just kind of going through some things, but talking about how they're talking about like friendships in companies, right? No longer really exist because in the virtual world, you can't. So like, being there in that environment, it's so hard to really teach and instill those values in the virtual environment. It can be done. You just have to be more intentional with it. But things that just used to would just organically happen when you're in the environment now, you have to look back and like, okay, well, what's non-negotiable from a virtual standpoint that we have to be intentional with to do. We're talking about leadership. I mean, everything we're talking about here, 100% is leadership, and it's that mindset that you have to have in whatever endeavor, whatever it is we're trying to accomplish. It's what it is.
You brought up a good point. I was just talking to a young man this past weekend, and he works remotely in a kind of an IT field, and we were talking about that aspect of being able to work in the office, and I said I really miss it, and it's interesting you say that, because what I missed probably the most wasn't necessarily like just I certainly miss having like a group of people in an office. I mean, I grew up in that generation, so I miss it, right? But I also miss the lunch, right? Because then I get to talk about you, and I get to be curious about your life, and right, it's all about we've lost a little bit about what's so special about us as a species is the human connection.
Yeah.
And people don't know what they don't know because some of them haven't grown up with it that way. And it really is the most special part of it is like those relationships, those, going biking after work or doing, things that like connect us. That's the stuff that, I just read a quote. That said something to the, and we know this, right? It's the most important thing to most people on their deathbed is how they made people feel. It's going to be like, that's going to be the measurement of your time here. It's not going to be that I had a big company or whatever that looks like. It's going to be, how did I make people feel? And I can't make them feel the way, that it's hard for me to make them feel that way if I never get to actually shake their hand and they can, there's an energy that happens in that space that is very difficult to create virtually.
Yeah, it is. It like, coming in here to Matt and DJ's office a few days a week, and a few of the other guys will roll in. Matt's here pretty religiously. So is DJ. But
yeah,
like, to the fact of it's beautiful outside. Like, we went and for a 45-minute walk and talk, and it's those little things, right, that really, I think I don't want to say plant the seeds, but really nurture the relationships and real conversations and real thoughts and real just, I miss it too. I think there's the good and the bad. There's maybe the hybrid for some, but it really is.
Even if I can, like, for me, like, I can be close to you now because I've been with you. I bet, I've come and I've eaten dinner with you. And so I think for me, and listen, this could admittedly be a generational thing. It could be, I struggle with that. And someone, that young man is like, oh, I got great relationships and I'm completely fulfilled. It may be a struggle for me just because of what I grew up with, and
Sure.
I acknowledge that. But even if I, like the relationships I had and still have all over the world, like I can now be close to them because I broke bread with them. I've had lunch, I've had dinner, I've had, some experiences with them. And I think I do well with that kind of, that kind of relationship. So,
a lot of the teams and everybody, I work with, it's a mix. Some have offices, some don't, but I always push them. Like, listen, you have to be strategic about bringing people together. You've got to carve out consistent time to where you're trying to drive everybody in. And it's tough. It's not easy, right? Like, we learned that lesson in DFW to where, depending upon the time of the day, I mean, 9 miles is 60 minutes, like depending upon the time of the day. So it's super important, but it's super important. Like we would even, we would a time once a week, we wanted everybody to come together. And then once a month we were out of the office together. It was super, super important for us to have that time together.
When we were just talking about this as well. So Elaine, my wife Elaine, she's my business partner and spouse, and the other half of everything we do here, and was a big part of our business before. And of course, we had an office in Shanghai, we had an office in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. Those people, some of those people never came to the U.S., and some of our U.S. employees never went to Asia. But Elaine was really, she's one of those people that's always trying to connect the emotional parts of ourselves, right? And so she created these a bunch of different tools to kind of share information about each other, like these company it was actually like a company flyer back then. It wasn't a web page, but there are, to your point, there are ways to still can create connection and create some intimacy, even though you can't come together. There are ways to do that.
Yeah. You just got to be intentional. And sometimes it's hard for us guys, right? So having that balance, but talking about pivoting and direction, obviously within an industry, but now, into real estate, like how is it, and what are the musts when you're looking and making changes and pivoting and you're in business with your significant other? Like what are, how do you have to navigate that relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. In our previous company, most people, unless they were employees, and even if they interviewed, they never. It took them months to figure out that Elaine was we were married. The delineation of respect and responsibility, and she wasn't an owner of the company, but she ran all our marketing and our office, and so that delineation, and again, it comes back to respect and a bunch of other things, but that really just carries on into real estate. For us, what's really important is real clarity on roles and responsibilities. So we're really clear on that, and that's a little harder when you're first learning something, because we're both learning, and so I think over time you're building your standard operating procedures, and you're getting really finite on every little aspect of who does what and how it's done, and then you're disciplined when people, because the outside world doesn't know who does what, right? I mean, we tell them, but the people will ask, I'll get 3 emails today of people asking me for things that she handles, and if I could answer any 3 of them like that, but then that erodes the continuity of our responsibility. So it's just being setting up great infrastructure and SOPs, and then I think being disciplined to that structure, because the outside world will, especially in real estate, when things are always trying to happen really quickly, people will want whoever will give it to them in that very moment. So
is it important to have kind of like a framework of communication as well when having a significant other, especially going through hard times and making changes and doing things?
Yeah. So the framework, we know relative to real estate, we know that there are certain situations where I'm going to be the person communicating this issue with the client, and the same goes for, there are things that Elaine does that I will stay out of, because I could add some value, but I also could I could cause some struggles in the situation. And so again, delineation of how we're going to communicate to the external world, and then internally it's back to making sure we're communicating with cadence, and that and that gets hard with real estate. I will say that gets hard. I had the interesting thing about real estate, and my hat's off to everybody that's doing bigger teams, or even solo agents that are doing big numbers, is just being able to carve out the time and understanding the necessity of communication and cadence and huddles, and and what that looks like to keep everybody moving, right? It's very easy to get busy, like we're all busy, and we are for sure. And the interesting part is if we fade away from the discipline of communication with it amongst ourselves, then it makes it even more difficult to do what we have to do in general.
Yeah.
So
It's the biggest thing that I've seen, spouses, significant others, not so much, maybe a little bit when you've got siblings involved, family, but really with especially if you're living with somebody, you tend to take for granted, just because I see them, that I'm communicating with them, when it's the furthest thing from the truth, because that's the last thing that's actually happening.
Yeah.
And it's one of the biggest adjustments. And once they make it's amazing how that just a cadence and a structure of communication can accelerate the momentum for the business moving forward. Just as simple as putting a framework of how and when we're going to talk and what we're going to talk about and what's the goal and the intent of every conversation.
Yeah, you're right about that 100%. And another thing I think that's important is for me, for us, for Elaine and I, is in creating some kind of ground rules for when we talk in the house, right? So I think for us, and everyone's different, there has to be some safe spaces where we're not going to talk about these things because maybe we disagree on how we're going to approach something, and that happens. That happens all the time. But we know that we're not going to talk about them while we're eating, because you don't come together to eat to have that kind of conversation, right?
Sure.
We try to create in the same when we're getting ready in the morning and going to bed at night. We try to carve that space out and say the problems are going to be there. We have the cadence that you're talking about. We're going to get to them tomorrow morning. Let's just be here together right now. And so those are, for us, that's an important
I love that
aspect of how we've tried to balance that.
Yeah, it's not easy, and you got to kind of remind yourselves, and sometimes one has to be the bigger person at times to be able to navigate through that.
You're right on the money there. It's like, because you're right on the money there, because I will be the one usually that's kind of saying, I'm eating dinner, I don't want to talk about that. But then if something's really bothering me, I have to be really mindful not to be, to bring it up,
Yeah. And especially when you have a significant other that's a mirror, right? Like Jay Shetty has this, that, the three loves of your life, right? You'll have the firecracker, the candle, and the mirror. Yeah. And when your significant other is the mirror, that's and it's funny what he says too about that is he's like, you'll tend to move away from the mirror, although the mirror is the one that you need to spend the most time with. And it's just fascinating when you have somebody that will, in a loving way, right? I learned that lesson from Jay Abraham.
Yeah.
And I might have told you the story. So I think it was the second, he was keynote. He keynoted for us twice. It might have been the second time. And we're walking back with him to his suite. And his wife is just chewing his ass. And we're like uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And he's just nodding, whatever. And he goes back, and they go back. And so we're sitting in the living area, and he goes back, and then he comes back out, and he goes, when somebody loves you so much because they know the standard that you want to have for yourself, and they are telling you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear, that's magic. And ever since then, like I was uncomfortable, and then I was like, damn, okay. Because, she was giving him feedback on what he could have done better. It's like, you're rambling too much. You're talking too much. You're doing da-da-da-da-da-da. And we were like, Jesus. But but she knew the standard that he wanted to be at. And she had permission to be able to have that. So I think that, like you said, the rules and the rules of communication.
I will say Elaine is probably a little more firecracker. Like she's, she'll give it to me for sure. Yeah. And I'm one of those, like, I don't know, everyone's different, right? I've learned to just let it come out. It's hard, right? When you're getting constructive feedback, it's difficult, especially from your spouse. Like
Yeah.
that's really hard space. So like if they were giving me, she was giving me feedback about how I behave with my sibling, or I mean, that's different. But in business, it's really tough, right?
Hmm.
And but usually I'm gonna just sit with it, and I'm gonna think it through, and maybe I don't agree with all of it, but I can tell you it always comes from a place of me being a better version of myself. Like
Hmm.
that's all. There's no
Yeah.
other motive there whatsoever. There's no ego. There's just, to your point, you want to be this. Well, then you got to do this. You
Yeah.
can't do that, right? And
And we all have the blind spots. It's so key. So Fred, navigating, the real estate terrain, looking kind of being able to draw from, all of your previous career and success and failures and lessons learned, and
yeah,
navigating to the real estate space, and really getting back to the customer, right? And being able to navigate through that kind of, obviously, the lessons learned, but where you're looking at to navigate into the future that you're excited about, with so much uncertainty in the marketplace. I mean, affordability. I saw another report today. Might be the fewest home sales, fewer than last year, which last year was what, like in the last 30 years.
right.
So, so much uncertainty, so much change. Obviously, in the AI era that we're
Yeah.
in. What are you think? How are you thinking about, navigating, the next 12, 18, 24 months? What are what's on your mind? What are you excited about?
Yeah. Yeah. So we're moving decidedly. We joined EXP Luxury. We haven't finished our rebrand yet, but we're going to rebrand, and we're going to start moving into the luxury space. One of the things we specialize in is really partnering with clients that are fully on board with improving the property, doing all the things they need to do, and kind of going through that journey. And so we've always had an eye to luxury, but we also knew we needed to learn a lot before we could go there as a small team. So the combination of moving into luxury, utilizing AI and some other software applications that might be available to us, but whether someone's selling a $400,000 home or a $4 million home, they still want to feel like they're being taken care of, right? Like their interests are being heard, and that because they have their own unique needs in that situation. And so I think we're excited to start to, now that we feel like we've got a lot to learn. We're always going to be learning, but we understand the business now well enough to feel like we can. It's just like in my previous company. Well, I started with these small basic programs, and as we did better, then we reserved the right to take on some of these bigger, more complicated programs and garments. And the same for me, that's how I would approach real estate. So I think that is really going to be the thing that excites me. I think that here in this part of the world, if we continue to market and create marketing in such a way, and maybe more marketing, to really touch people, to try to reach out and help them understand how we will help them, and how and what that might feel like through our marketing. I think I believe that will be a separator for us. And so we're excited to start into that process, and we'll probably bring some more strategic people on to help as we move into that space. We have them now, but as you move into higher price points, you need sometimes different service providers and other
Sure.
things. So we're excited to do that, and I think that'll be. We've come to the conclusion that while we might add a small amount of people, we're not looking to build a big team. We've done that, and for where we're at, we have other business ventures that we're going to be working on as well, and we think that moving into luxury will allow us to continue to build the appropriate revenue stream, and still have some bandwidth to do some of the other things we want to do. So
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you have just such a wealth of knowledge and experience to really tap in. And I mean, kudos to you, man. You've been boots on the ground hardcore for the last couple of years and like making the connections. And it's funny, like, I mean, what you said, and I think there's a lot of people in a similar situation that, you know, I've lived in this area for a decade and I don't know one person. And it's like, wow, right. I gotta really dig in and build relationships, which take time. That's the thing. Time is the biggest thing there. And, you know, I think, you know, for agents getting into the business now, understanding that, you know, in the age of, you know, short attention spans, like, listen, like, time and temperature, this is going to take time. And I think it's really hard for people to get their head around that. But, you know, thinking about agents getting in, I mean, your previous experience, I mean, been dabbling in all facets of real estate for the, you know, over 3 decades, 40 years. What is it that, you know, pushing out to agents, getting in, be like, listen, like, you need to have your mindset here if this is what you want to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. If I see an agent that's coming into this space, I really feel like so many of them, including myself, come in and don't realize a couple of things. They don't realize how important the professionalism is. And if they haven't had an opportunity yet to develop that, then there's ways to do that. There's ways to, you know, that you can accelerate that professionalism. And I just think that's always going to be critically important. And because it's going to dictate how you deal with everything. It's how you dictate with your peers, how you dictate with the other side, how you dictate with your clients, how you engage with them. And so just, you know, learning that, I think is really important. And then we all know this is a sales business. And if you're solo coming in and no one's providing you leads, that's, you know, and that was admittedly, I, you know, because pre-COVID, it didn't seem like it was that, you know, from an outside in, let's just say, I was doing all my previous experience with real estate was, you know, I bought with an agent and I sold myself. But it's a sales business, and it takes a lot of effort to get out in front of people and build your brand and be true to that, right? To be true to who you say you are, show up just like you said you would in your marketing. And I think that's the hardest part. And the other part is, like, care so much about every client you have that you service them. And, you know, you have to respect yourself and you have to have boundaries, but you want every client to be your biggest advocate. And that's something we pride ourselves on, Elaine and I both.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. Fred, you're amazing. I appreciate you carving out the time, jumping in here with us, and sharing your story and wealth of knowledge, and really, you know, the true essence of the whole agent to CEO concept. So I appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate you too, man. Take care.
Awesome. All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Yeah.